Lena Harper hit the water back first, and the ocean swallowed her whole. She did not scream. There was no point. 6 wolves had held her arms while the elder read the decree, and when the longboat reached the boundary waters where the current turned black and the air tasted like something corroded, they tipped her over the side the way someone dumps kitchen scraps. No ceremony, no blindfold, just hands releasing and the sky shrinking above her as the sea pulled her down. She was 17 years old. The crime they charged her with was not something she had done, it was something she was, or rather, something she was not. In a world where every shifter carried a scent signature as distinct as a fingerprint, where wolves could be tracked across continents by the trail of pine smoke, or wet stone or blood cedar they left behind them, Lena Harper carried nothing, no scent, no trace, no signature at all. She moved through the world like a hole in the air, and that absence had terrified her pack since the day she was born. A scentless wolf was not a medical curiosity, it was an omen, a fracture in the natural order. The healers had tested her 9 separate times, and each time the instruments came back blank. The room got a little quieter, and the faces got a little harder. By the time she was 15, her own mother had stopped meeting her eyes across the dinner table. By 16, the whispers had turned to formal complaints filed with the elder council. By 17, the council had found a word for what she was: abomination. The island they sent her to had a name that translated roughly to the place teeth do not reach. It sat 3 miles past the boundary waters, a volcanic fist of black rock punching up through the ocean, wrapped in jungle so dense the canopy ate daylight for breakfast. No dock, no beach, no path, just razor-edged volcanic stone that could fillet a hand to the bone, and beyond it a green darkness that moved and breathed and watched. For 200 years, the wolf packs had used this island as an execution method that let them sleep at night. They did not kill their condemned, they simply put them somewhere that did the killing for them. No one had ever returned from the island, no one had ever been expected to. Lena dragged herself onto the rocks as the longboat disappeared into the gray distance. Her palms opened against the stone. Blood ran between her fingers in thin red lines. She did not look at the blood. She looked at the jungle. It looked back. Something moved in the tree line, something with eyes that caught the failing light and held it like a threat. Lena could not identify it. She could not identify anything on this island. Every species here had evolved in isolation, designed by generations of brutal selection to be venomous, or fast, or both, and she had arrived with nothing but a torn dress and the salt water burning in her wounds. She was supposed to die in 3 days. That was the unofficial timeline. The council members who had voted for her banishment probably expected 2. Lena Harper did not die in 3 days. On day 1, she found water, a thin trickle running down the interior face of a volcanic ridge, filtered through layers of mineral rock until it came out clean enough to drink without retching. She drank until her stomach cramped, and then she drank more, because dehydration killed faster than anything with teeth. On day 2, she found the bones. A pile of them, scattered beneath a rock overhang that formed a natural shelter. Some were animal, some were not. The ones that were not had been there long enough to go yellow-gray and brittle, and Lena understood with a clarity that felt almost calm that these were the remains of other condemned wolves, other abominations. Other problems the council had solved by geography. She picked up a femur bone that still had some weight to it and spent 2 hours grinding one end against the volcanic rock until it came to a point sharp enough to puncture the thick-skinned fruit she had found growing in clusters near the water source. She ate the fruit, she kept the bone, she did not think about whose leg it had been. On day 2, the ridge cat came. It was nothing like the animals she had studied in pack school. Twice the size of a mainland predator, with a low-slung body built for navigating the jagged terrain, and pupils that looked like cracked glass. Its fur was the same color as the volcanic stone, a camouflage so perfect that Lena did not see it until it was 12 feet away and closing. It made no sound. Its mouth was already open. Lena did not run. There was nowhere to run to. Instead, she did something that her body chose for her. a decision made below the level of conscious thought, in the place where survival lives when everything else has been stripped away. She dropped low, drove the sharpened bone forward with both hands, and felt it punch through the space between the animal's jaw and throat. The ridge cat fell. Lena fell with it. They lay together on the volcanic rock, tangled and bleeding, while the jungle went silent around them in acknowledgement of what had just happened. She sat on the carcass afterward and ate the rest of her fruit because there was nothing else to do, and crying was an energy expenditure she could not afford. Energy was currency on this island. Grief was a luxury item. She was in no position to shop. The first year was arithmetic. Calories in versus calories burned, water sources mapped and memorized, predator territories charted by the claw marks they left on the volcanic stone, each species carving at a different height so the rock faces read like a brutal census. Lena learned to read those marks the way she had once read textbooks, with focus and repetition and the understanding that a wrong answer meant something worse than a failing grade. She built her first shelter from volcanic rock stacked without mortar, wedged into a natural alcove on the island's eastern ridge. It was ugly. It leaked when it rained. It kept the ridge cats out, and that was the only metric that mattered. By year 2, she had expanded the shelter, woven bark panels for the gaps, a raised sleeping platform to keep her off the ground where the rock vipers hunted at night, a stone-lined pit for fire that vented smoke through a natural chimney in the rock above. She was not comfortable, she was alive, and she was beginning to understand that those two conditions did not need to overlap. By year 3, she had mapped the entire island, every water source, every predator migration route, every seasonal shift in the jungle's behavior. She discovered the high meadow on the island's northern face, a clearing at elevation where volcanic soil mixed with organic matter to produce something that could grow a rough grain if she planted it at the right time and defended it from the birds that descended in screaming clouds every harvest. She talked to herself during year 3, full conversations, both sides, playing characters she remembered from her old life. Her mother, her pack teacher, the boy in the year above her who had once shared his lunch with her before his parents found out what she was and made him stop. She gave them all lines and spoke them aloud, because silence was a pressure that built behind her eyes if she let it accumulate for too long. By year 5, she stopped talking to herself, not because the pressure had gone away, but because she had expanded to fill the silence the way water fills a container. She and the quiet had reached an arrangement. It did not press on her. She did not resist it. They coexisted, and the coexistence had a texture that was almost like peace. Her wolf had changed during those 5 years. The beast half that shared her body had always been quiet, muted, in a way that the pack healers attributed to her scentlessness, as if the absence of a scent meant an absence of the wolf itself. They were wrong. Her wolf had not been absent. It had been waiting. And on the island, where there were no pack hierarchies to confuse it, and no social signals to misread, her wolf had finally unfurled. It was enormous. Not physically. Physically, Lena shifted to a wolf of average size, gray-white and lean from the island diet. But the presence of it, the internal weight of the animal inside her, was something she had never felt before. It anchored her to the ground. It read the wind like a language. It processed the island's 1,000 dangers with a calm, analytical precision that kept her alive on the days when her human mind wanted to sit down on the volcanic rock and simply stop. And her scentlessness, the thing that had made her an abomination, had become her single greatest advantage. Every predator on the island hunted by smell. The ridge cats, the rock vipers, the canopy spiders with leg spans wider than her arms could stretch. They all tracked their prey through scent trails left on stone and bark and air. Lena left no trail. She moved through the island's food chain like a gap in the data, present but undetectable, and the predators that should have killed her 100 times over simply did not know she was there until she had already passed. By year 7, she had stopped thinking of herself as a banished wolf. She was not a wolf in exile. She was something the island had built from raw material, the way the volcanic rock built new land from molten earth. She was indigenous to this place now. Its rhythms were her rhythms. Its dangers were her vocabulary. She dreamed in the sounds of the jungle at night, the layered frequencies of insects and wind, and the distant rumble of the volcano's internal digestion. By year 10, Lena Harper had become the thing that should not exist, a living person on an island, designed to produce only dead ones. She had outlasted every prediction, every expectation, every quiet assumption made by the council members who had tipped a 17-year-old girl into the sea and gone home to their dinners. She had not heard another voice in 10 years. She had stopped expecting to, and that was the year the boat appeared on the horizon. Lena saw it from the high meadow at dawn, a dark shape on the silver water that was too angular to be driftwood and too purposeful to be debris. It moved against the current, which meant it was powered, which meant there was someone at the oars, one boat, one figure, heading directly for the island's southern face, where the volcanic rock sloped just enough to allow a landing that would only break half the bones in your body, instead of all of them. She watched it for 20 minutes without moving, her wolf pressed against the inside of her ribs, alert but not alarmed. After 10 years, alarm required a higher threshold than a single boat. The figure pulled the boat onto the rocks with a competence that told her two things immediately. First, he was strong. The boat was heavy, and the current fought him, and he handled both with the kind of physical authority that came from a body accustomed to being obeyed. Second, he was a wolf. She could tell by the way he moved on the rocks, the subtle shifts in balance that no human body would make instinctively, the low center of gravity, and the way his head turned to process sound before his eyes confirmed what he had heard. He stood on her island, 6 feet and change of muscle and bad decisions, and looked at the jungle the way someone looks at a locked door. Lena did not go down to meet him. She pulled back from the meadow's edge into the tree line, climbed the tallest canopy tree on the northern ridge, and settled into the fork between trunk and branch that she used as a watching post. From there, she could see everything he did, and everything he did, for the first 3 hours, was wrong. He built a fire in a windbreak that would funnel smoke directly into a ground-level viper nest 30 yards uphill. He tested the nearest stream by cupping it in his hands and sniffing it, apparently unaware that the mineral content of that particular tributary shifted with the lunar cycle, and this was a week when drinking it would produce stomach cramps severe enough to immobilize him for a full day. He chose a sleeping spot, with his back to a rock face that had fresh ridge catclaw marks, at a height consistent with a breeding female, which meant the animal was territorial, hormonal, and roughly 200% more dangerous than the standard model. Lena watched all of this with the specific irritation of an expert watching an amateur misuse their tools. He was going to die here. Not eventually, soon, possibly tonight, if the ridge cat came back to check her territory and found a large, warm-blooded male sleeping against her favorite scratching post. This presented a problem. If he died, his people might come looking. More boats, more wolves, more feet on her island, more scents in her jungle, more disruption to the careful balance she had spent a decade building. His death would be an invitation, and Lena did not want guests. So she kept him alive, not out of kindness, out of territorial pragmatism. She redirected the ridge cat first, dropping from the canopy on the opposite side of the ridge and placing a scent lure made from the gland sac of a rock viper, which she had learned to extract in year 4. The ridge cat would follow the viper scent away from the sleeping wolf and spend the night hunting in the eastern ravine instead. She collapsed the entrance to the viper nest with 3 carefully placed rocks, sealing the snakes inside before the smoke from his fire could drive them out and send them looking for the nearest warm body. She filled a hollowed gourd with clean water from her mapped source on the northern face and placed it 10 feet from his camp, positioned against a natural rock basin so it would look like rainwater collection rather than a gift. 3 interventions, 3 lives saved. He slept through all of them. Lena returned to her canopy post and watched him breathe in the firelight, this stranger on her island, this wolf who had sailed alone to a place no one returned from, and she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Curiosity. Not warmth, not hope, not any of the soft things that stories would want her to feel at the arrival of another living person after a decade of solitude. Curiosity, which was sharper than any of those and far more dangerous, because curiosity was the thing that made you move closer when every survival instinct said to stay in the trees. She stayed in the trees, for now. Cole Weston had been Alpha King for 6 years, and the job fit him the way a shoe fits 3 sizes too small. You could wear it, you could walk in it, but every single step reminded you that something fundamental about the arrangement was wrong. It was not the power that bothered him. Power was a lever, and he understood levers. You applied force at the right angle, and things moved in the direction you wanted. He had been doing that since he was 24, when his father had died mid-sentence during a council address, and Cole had inherited a kingdom that was still processing the shock of watching its previous king collapse face first into a water glass. The transition had been smooth in the way that a river going over a waterfall is smooth. The water keeps moving. It just changes direction rather dramatically on the way down. What Cole hated was the theater. The council meetings where 7 old wolves spent 4 hours debating a trade agreement that could have been settled in 11 minutes if anyone in the room had been willing to say what they actually meant instead of wrapping it in 3 layers of diplomatic gauze. The state dinners where he sat at the head of a table long enough to land a small aircraft and made conversation with wolves whose primary interest in him was biological. The mate selections. The mate selections were the worst. Every quarter, the Elder Council presented him with candidates. Females of rank, of proven bloodline, of strategic value to the kingdom's alliances. They arrived in formal dress, accompanied by their family delegations, and were introduced to Cole in a receiving room that smelled like old wood and quiet desperation. Each candidate would approach, and Cole's wolf would assess the compatibility the way wolves had done for centuries, through scent, through the subtle chemical conversation that happened below the level of conscious thought, the ancient negotiation between 2 animals deciding whether they were meant to build something together. 43 candidates in 6 years. His wolf had rejected every single one. Not with hostility. That would have at least been interesting. His wolf simply did not engage. It would rise briefly at each new approach, assess the scent signature with the clinical detachment of a customs officer checking a passport, and then settle back down into the deep internal silence that it had occupied for as long as Cole could remember. No recognition, no spark, no pull, just the flat animal equivalent of not this one. 43 times. His second, a wolf named Drew Beckett, who had the build of a professional rugby player and the diplomatic instincts of a golden retriever, had started keeping a tally on the wall behind his desk. He thought he was being funny. Cole let him keep it because removing it would have required a conversation about feelings, and Cole Weston did not have conversations about feelings. He had conversations about territory, about trade, about the 17 border disputes that required his attention every month. Feelings were a department he had closed due to budget cuts. The problem was political. An unbonded Alpha King was a power vacuum in slow motion. Without a bonded mate, his wolf would never reach full resonance, and without full resonance, the kingdom's pack bonds weakened incrementally every year. It was not a crisis. It was a leak, a drip in the ceiling that everyone could hear, but no one could find, and eventually the drip would become a puddle, and the puddle would become structural damage, and by then it would be too late to fix without tearing up the floor. The Elder Council reminded him of this at every meeting. His mother reminded him at every dinner. Drew reminded him every time he added a new mark to the wall. Cole dealt with this the way he dealt with most emotional pressure. He worked longer hours, ran harder patrols, and spent increasing amounts of time alone in the boundary forests where the kingdom's territory ended and the unclaimed wilderness began. His wolf liked the edges, the places where the rules thinned out and the world got simpler. The scent dreams started in his 7th year as king. At first he thought it was stress. His healers confirmed that alpha wolves under prolonged bonding pressure could develop sensory disruptions, phantom scents that represented the wolf's unfulfilled searching instinct manifesting in sleep. It was uncommon but not unheard of. They recommended rest, which was their recommendation for everything, and Cole ignored it, which was his response to everything. But these were not phantom scents. They were the opposite. They were pockets of absence, holes in the middle of his sleeping mind where scent should have been but was not. Negative spaces that pulled at him the way a current pulls, not with force, but with the steady removal of everything solid. He would wake gasping, his wolf pacing behind his ribs like a prisoner testing the walls of a cell, and the room would smell wrong in every direction. Too much, too layered, too full, as if his wolf was comparing everything it could detect to a reference point of nothing, and finding everything wanting. The dreams increased in frequency. Once a week became twice, twice became nightly. Cole stopped sleeping in his quarters and started sleeping in the boundary forests, where the air was cleaner and the scent layers were thinner, and even there the absence found him. It pressed against his sleeping mind like a hand against a window, and his wolf rose to meet it every time with a desperation that was beginning to frighten him. Drew noticed. Drew noticed everything, which was his most irritating quality and the reason Cole kept him around. "You look like someone who is not sleeping," Drew said one morning, with the careful neutrality of a man who knows exactly what he is stepping into and has decided to step into it anyway. "I am sleeping," Cole said, "in the forest." "Ah, normal behavior for a king." "I needed air." "You needed air for 6 consecutive nights." Cole did not answer. He was looking at the map on his study wall, the one that showed the kingdom's territory in clean lines with the boundary waters marked in blue along the western edge. Beyond the boundary waters, the map was empty, uncharted. The wolf packs had an informal agreement that nothing past the boundary line was worth claiming, because nothing past the boundary line was survivable. Volcanic islands, toxic currents, predator ecosystems that had evolved without interference for millennia. And somewhere out there, according to his wolf's increasingly frantic nighttime search, was the source of the nothing that was keeping him awake. The storm came 3 weeks later. It was not a normal seasonal system. The boundary waters had their own weather patterns, independent of the mainland, and they occasionally produced storms of unusual intensity that rearranged the current patterns for days at a time. This one pushed the currents west, which had the effect of carrying surface-level scent information from the deep ocean toward the trade routes that ran along the boundary line. The trade ships noticed first. 3 captains filed reports within 2 days of each other, all describing the same phenomenon. A scent void, a moving pocket of nothing in the wind patterns that registered on their tracking instruments as a blank, a gap in the data where the air should have been carrying something and instead carried an absence so total it tripped their sensors. All 3 reports placed the void's origin at the same coordinates, the Forbidden Island, the place teeth do not reach. Cole read the reports in his study at 2 in the morning because he was not sleeping and pretending otherwise had become exhausting. A scent void, coming from a death island where no one had survived in 200 years. His wolf heard the information before his brain finished processing it, and what his wolf did in response was something Cole had never felt before. It did not pace, it did not press, it locked on, the way a compass needle locks onto north, with a certainty so absolute, it felt like physics rather than instinct. His wolf was pointing west, toward the boundary waters, toward the island, toward the nothing. Cole stood in his study and felt the pull settle into his bones like a decision he had already made. He told Drew he was going hunting. "Hunting what?" Drew asked. "I will know when I find it." "That is not how hunting works." "It is how this works." He took 1 boat, told no one the destination, left before dawn on a morning when the sea was flat and gray and empty in every direction, and his wolf was so far forward in his consciousness that his eyes had been gold since midnight. 6 years of 43 candidates who could not wake his wolf, and now the animal was dragging him across an ocean toward a dead island because it had detected the absence of something it could not name. He did not find this ironic. He found it infuriating. Irony required a sense of humor about the situation, and Cole Weston's sense of humor about his bonding situation had expired somewhere around Candidate 31, a perfectly nice wolf from the Northern Ridge Alliance, who had sneezed during her introduction and then apologized for it, with such genuine embarrassment that Cole had felt worse about his wolf's rejection than any of the others. He rowed west. The current fought him. He did not care. The island appeared on the horizon like a bruise, dark rock against dark water, ringed by a surf line that broke white against the volcanic stone. With a jungle canopy so thick and green, it looked like the land was wearing a crown of thorns made from vegetation instead of wire. Nothing about it invited approach. Everything about it said go back. His wolf said forward. The landing nearly killed him. The southern face of the island had a slope that allowed access, but the volcanic rock was sharp enough to cut through boot leather, and the surf pushed his boat sideways into a formation that punched a hole in the hull below the waterline. He dragged the damaged boat above the tide line and assessed the situation with the calm practicality of someone who has made a commitment and no longer has the option of uncommitting. He was on a death island with a sinking boat and no way to communicate with the mainland. His wolf did not care about any of this. His wolf was already tracking, already searching, already processing the island's scent layers with an intensity that made Cole's head ache. The jungle was a wall of overlapping information, hundreds of unfamiliar species, each producing their own chemical signature, and his wolf was sorting through all of it, discarding everything that registered as something and searching for the one signal that registered as nothing. The viper hit him within the first hour. It was a rock viper, a species he had never seen before and could not have anticipated. Camouflaged against the volcanic stone with a pattern so perfect that Cole literally stepped on it before he realized the ground had opinions about being walked on. The strike was fast and accurate, twin punctures in his left calf that delivered a venom payload designed to immobilize prey within minutes. His wolf healed the wound. That was the advantage of being an alpha, the accelerated healing that came with the full resonance of a dominant wolf. But the venom still worked through his system for 4 hours, producing a fever that dropped him to his knees in a clearing he had not chosen and filled his head with dreams that were more like arguments. When the fever broke, it was dark. The jungle had changed its voice from daytime to nighttime, a shift in frequency that replaced the layered insect chorus with something deeper, something with more bass, something that sounded like the island clearing its throat. He built a fire. He found water. He set up a camp against a rock face that seemed defensible and prepared to sleep with one eye open and his wolf standing guard behind his ribs. He was wrong about the rock face. He was wrong about the water. He was wrong about the fire placement. He was wrong about almost everything, because this island did not operate on the rules he knew, and confidence was not a substitute for knowledge. He should have died 3 times in his first 2 nights. He did not die because someone was keeping him alive. He found the gourd on morning 3. It was sitting against a natural rock basin 10 feet from his camp, a hollowed container filled with clean water, and there was no possible way it had gotten there by accident. The basin was dry. The nearest water source was 200 yards uphill. Someone had carried this water down and placed it here, positioned carefully to look natural but failing, because natural water collection does not happen in a gourd that has been shaped by tools. Cole stared at the gourd for a long time. Then he did something that his wolf had been demanding since the moment he set foot on this island. He spoke. "I know you are here," he said to the jungle. His voice sounded wrong in the silence. Too loud, too human. "My wolf can feel the shape of where you are not." Nothing moved. Nothing answered. The jungle held its silence the way a held breath holds its air, with effort, with intention. But somewhere up in the canopy, 70 feet above Cole's head, a woman who had not heard another voice in 10 years pressed her forehead against the bark of a tree and felt something shift inside her chest. Something she had spent a decade sealing over with discipline and silence and the slow, patient work of becoming someone who did not need other people. She pressed harder into the bark, counted the ridges under her skin. 14, 15, 16. She did not come down. Lena had outwaited storms that lasted 9 days. She had outwaited the breeding season of a ridge cat that had decided her shelter was a suitable nursery, spending 3 weeks in a backup position on the northern ridge while the animal raised 4 kittens in her home and destroyed her rain collection system in the process. She had outwaited a volcanic tremor that split her original shelter down the middle and forced her to rebuild from raw stone in the wet season when the rain fell sideways and the ground never fully dried. She could outwait anything. It was her primary skill, her deepest competence, the thing the island had taught her that no pack school could have. Cole Weston did not appear to be something that could be outweighted. He did not leave. That was the first problem. She had expected him to stay 2 days, maybe 3, before the island's hostility overwhelmed his purpose and drove him back to his damaged boat and whatever repair he could manage. But 3 days became 4, and 4 became 5, and on day 5 Lena crawled close enough to his camp in the pre-dawn darkness to see the royal crest scarred into his left shoulder, the mark burned into the skin during the coronation ceremony that every wolf in every territory recognized on sight. The Alpha King, on her island, sleeping against a rock face with ridge cat claw marks, drinking water she had carried for him, talking to a jungle that would not talk back. This was not a rescue party. A rescue party came with boats and soldiers and organizational competence. This was one man with a damaged vessel and a wolf that would not let him turn around, and that combination was more dangerous than any organized expedition because it was not rational and therefore could not be predicted. He talked to her every day, to the empty jungle, out loud, in a voice that was deep and unhurried and carried the faint trace of an accent she could not place. Northern territories, maybe. The consonants had edges. He told her about the council. 7 old wolves who treated governance like a competitive sport, where the objective was to use the most words while saying the least. He described them with a precision that made Lena suspect he had been composing these descriptions for years, refining them in his head during the very meetings he was describing. He told her about the mate selections. 43 candidates in 6 years, each one arriving with family and formality and the weight of alliance politics, each one leaving with the polite confusion of someone who has been examined and found adequate by every measure except the one that matters. He told her about Drew, his second, who kept a tally on his office wall and thought he was being subtle about it. He described Drew the way people describe a brother they did not choose but would not trade. Annoyed fondness wrapped in exasperated loyalty. He told her about the scent dreams, the pockets of nothing that found him in his sleep and pulled at him until waking felt like surfacing from deep water. He described the sensation with a careful honesty that surprised Lena, because kings in her experience did not admit to vulnerability. Kings performed strength the way actors performed Shakespeare, loudly and with conviction, and with the faint suspicion that no one in the audience was fully convinced. Cole Weston sat by his campfire and told the jungle he was losing sleep over the smell of nothing, and he said it the way someone says a true thing that they have been carrying alone for too long. Without performance, without armor, just the words and the fire and the dark. Lena listened from distances that shrank by inches each day. She told herself this was strategic. The closer she was, the more information she gathered, and information was survival. She told herself that understanding his purpose was necessary for predicting his behavior, and predicting his behavior was necessary for managing the threat he represented to her territory. She told herself a lot of things during those first 5 days, and most of them had the thin, unconvincing quality of explanations constructed after the fact to justify a decision the body had already made. On day 6, she was in the undergrowth, close enough to see the firelight move across his face, close enough to hear the specific texture of his breathing when he paused between sentences, the way the air caught in his chest, as if his wolf was pushing against his lungs from the inside. On day 7, she was at the shadow line, the exact boundary where the firelight ended and the darkness began. She sat in the last inch of dark and watched him talk to the space where she was, and her wolf, The enormous quiet presence that had anchored her to this island for a decade did something it had never done before. It leaned forward, not physically, internally, a shift in orientation, like a compass needle adjusting. Her wolf leaned toward this stranger with an attention that was different from alertness, different from threat assessment, different from the 1,000 forms of animal awareness she had cataloged in 10 years of solitary survival. This was recognition without familiarity, knowing without knowledge, the sensation of encountering something your body has been calibrated to find without your mind ever being informed of the search. Lena sat in the dark and felt her wolf lean toward Cole Weston, and the fear that moved through her was not the sharp, clean fear of a physical threat. It was the slower, deeper fear of a locked door opening when you have spent 10 years arranging your entire life around the assumption that it would stay closed. On day 8, he said something that nearly broke her. He was talking about the trade reports. 3 ship captains detecting a scent void in the boundary water currents, tracking it back to this island. He explained it factually, without drama, the way someone presents evidence they have already evaluated. The void pulled my wolf forward, he said to the dark, not because it was nothing, because it felt like the one thing my wolf has been looking for in 43 candidates and 6 years of empty rooms. I did not come here to rescue anyone. I came here because my wolf would not let me sleep until I did. He paused. The fire cracked. I did not expect anyone to be alive. Lena pressed her back against a tree trunk and felt the bark through her shirt and focused on the texture of it because the alternative was focusing on the fact that someone had just told her, without knowing she could hear, that his wolf had crossed an ocean to find her. Not the idea of her, not a prophecy or a political calculation. Her, the specific emptiness she created in the air, the nothing that had gotten her thrown into the sea at 17. His wolf wanted the exact thing that her pack had decided was an abomination. She did not cry. She had not cried in 10 years, and she was not going to start, because a king with a compass for a wolf said something that landed in the center of a wound she had spent a decade pretending did not exist. She counted bark ridges instead. 22, 23, 24. On day 9, she broke. Not dramatically, not with a collapse or a revelation or a cinematic moment of surrender. She broke because he said something wrong. He was describing the island's eastern ridge cats. He had been observing them from a safe distance, cataloging their behavior with the methodical attention of someone who processes uncertainty through information gathering, and he had concluded that they were nocturnal hunters who used the darkness to ambush prey. He was wrong. The eastern ridge cats were crepuscular, dawn and dusk hunters, who used the transitional light to exploit the gap between the nocturnal prey's waking and the diurnal prey's sleeping. The distinction was not academic. A wolf who believed the ridge cats hunted at night would relax during the twilight hours, which were exactly the hours when the ridge cats were most active and most lethal. His error would kill him. Maybe not tonight, maybe not this week, but eventually the wrong assumption would put him in the wrong place at the wrong time, and the ridge cat would not care about his royal crest, or his kingdom, or his wolf that had crossed an ocean for nothing. Lena heard the error and felt it land in her body the way a splinter lands, small and sharp and impossible to ignore. Crepuscular, she said from the darkness. Her voice came out ruined. 10 years of silence had stripped it down to something that sounded like gravel being dragged across stone. The word hurt her throat coming out, and it hung in the air between them like a foreign object, too heavy, too real, too irreversible. Cole went still. His wolf surged forward so hard and so fast that Lena saw his eyes change color in the firelight, human brown flooding gold in a wave that started at the pupils and swept outward. His entire body oriented toward her voice, the way a satellite dish orients toward a signal, complete rotation, total focus, and Lena felt the weight of his wolf's attention land on her like a physical thing, like gravity had locally increased. "Stay there," she said. A command, not a request, not a negotiation. The voice of someone who had been the most dangerous thing on a death island for 10 years and was not going to reclassify herself because company arrived. He stayed. They talked across the dark for 3 more nights, Lena on her side of the firelight boundary, Cole on his. The conversations were not what she had expected. She had expected questions, interrogation, the procedural curiosity of a king who had found an anomaly and wanted it classified. Instead, he talked about the ridge cats. He asked her about the viper species. He wanted to know about the high meadow grain and the water cycle and the seasonal shifts in the canopy's behavior. He asked her about her island the way someone asks about a country they are visiting, with respect and genuine interest and the implicit acknowledgement that the person they were asking knew more than they did. Lena answered, carefully at first, rationing her words the way she rationed water in the dry season, giving enough to sustain the conversation without depleting her reserves. But the words came easier than she expected. 10 years of silence had not erased her vocabulary. It had compressed it, concentrated it, so that when she spoke, each word carried more weight than it had when she was 17, and used language the way teenagers do, abundantly and wastefully, and without awareness of its cost. She told him about the 3 seasons, the wet, the dry, and the volcanic, when the island's internal furnace vented gases through fissures in the rock, and everything with lungs moved to higher ground for 2 weeks. She told him about the canopy spider migration, how the spiders moved in coordinated waves across the treetops every 7 months, stringing web highways between the tallest trees that lasted exactly long enough for the next generation to travel and then dissolved. She told him about the silence, how it had changed from enemy to roommate to something closer to a language she had learned to speak. She did not tell him about the banishment. Not yet. That information sat in a different compartment, behind a different lock, and the key to it was not knowledge sharing. The key was trust, and trust was a resource she had not produced or consumed in a decade. On night 11, Cole told her about the bonding instinct. He explained it without poetry, because Cole Weston did not appear to be a man who used poetry when engineering would suffice. The bonding instinct was a biological mechanism, a chemical and spiritual alignment between 2 wolves whose combined resonance exceeded their individual frequencies. When it fired, it was not subtle, it was not ambiguous. It was a restructuring of the wolf's internal orientation, permanent and total, and every wolf who had experienced it described it in similar terms. The sense of a compass finding north, the end of searching. His wolf had never fired the instinct. 43 candidates, 0 responses. The healers had theories. The council had theories. Drew had a theory that involved Cole being emotionally unavailable, which Cole disputed on the grounds that emotional availability was not a medical diagnosis. And then I started dreaming about nothing, he said, looking at the fire rather than at the dark where she sat. Not something, nothing. The absence of scent, a gap in the air. My wolf would wake up reaching for it, and every time it dissolved I felt like I had lost something I never had. Lena sat in the dark and felt the weight of that description settle over her like a net. He was describing her. The nothing his wolf was chasing was the nothing she produced. The scent void that had terrified her pack, that had ended her life at 17, that had followed her across 10 years, and an ocean to this island where she thought she had finally escaped its consequences. It had not followed her. It had called to him. On night 12, she told him about the banishment. 1 sentence. She gave it 1 sentence because more than 1 sentence would have required her to open a door she had sealed with 10 years of volcanic rock and silence. And 1 sentence was all the structural integrity of that seal could withstand. My pack dropped me in the water when I was 17 because my scent scared them. She said it flat, no emotion. The way someone reports a fact they have long since processed into data. She set it down in the dark between them like a stone and waited. Cole's silence lasted long enough that the fire cracked twice and a night bird called from the eastern ridge and the jungle's ambient hum cycled through a full-frequency rotation. When he spoke, his voice had changed. The warmth was gone. The wry self-deprecation was gone. The careful, unhurried cadence of a man who chose his words with deliberate precision was gone. What remained was something older and simpler, something with teeth behind it. Which pack? 2 words. They landed in the dark with a weight that Lena recognized because she had produced that exact weight herself, once, a long time ago, the night she killed her first ridge cat and felt the shift from prey to predator move through her body like a tide change. It was the voice of someone deciding what to dismantle. Lena sat in the darkness with the sound of that voice settling into her chest, and for the first time in 10 years, the silence she had built around herself did not feel like protection. It felt like a wall she had been standing behind for so long she had forgotten there was another side. She did not answer his question that night. She left, disappeared into the canopy with a silence so absolute that Cole, whose wolf had been tracking the shape of her absence for days, lost her completely. One moment the darkness across the fire held the weight of her presence. The next it was just dark. Empty dark. The regular kind, without the texture of a person hiding inside it. He sat by the dying fire and did not sleep. His wolf did not sleep either, but for a different reason. His wolf was processing the information she had given him, turning it over the way a jeweler turns a stone, examining every facet with a precision that bordered on obsession. A pack had thrown a 17-year-old into the Boundary Waters, had loaded her into a boat, sailed her to a death island, and dropped her into the ocean knowing she would either drown or be consumed by the island's predators. They had done this not because she had committed a crime or threatened their safety or broken any law on any book in any territory. They had done it because she smelled wrong, because her scent, or the absence of it, disrupted their understanding of how the world was supposed to be organized, and rather than update their understanding, they had decided to remove the disruption. Cole knew politics. He knew power. He knew the ugly mechanics of how councils justified their decisions and how elders wrapped cruelty in the language of tradition. He had been governing for 6 years, and in that time he had seen enough institutional failings to know that the wolves who threw Lena into the sea had probably slept well that night. They had probably filed the paperwork, closed the case, updated the census, and moved on to the next item on the agenda. They had probably stopped thinking about her within the week. Cole was going to find them. Not now, not today, but eventually, when this was finished, and the island was behind them, and the pieces of this impossible situation had been assembled into something that resembled a plan, he was going to find every wolf who had participated in that banishment, the elder who read the decree, the 6 who held her down, the boat operator, the council members who voted. He was going to find them, and he was going to ensure they understood exactly what they had thrown away. His wolf settled behind his ribs with a patience that felt like a blade being sheathed. Not calmer, simply waiting. Lena returned the next morning, not to the shadow line, not to the undergrowth or the canopy. She walked into his camp in daylight, full visibility, and stood 12 feet from his fire pit with the morning sun on her face, and Cole Weston saw her clearly for the first time. She was not what he expected. He did not know what he expected, but it was not this. She was lean in the way that decade-long survival makes a person lean, all functional muscle and economy of movement, nothing wasted, nothing decorative. Her hair was dark and cut short, with what appeared to be a stone blade, uneven but practical. Her hands were mapped with small scars, a decade's worth of volcanic rock and sharp tools, and the general wear of living on an island that did not want her alive. She wore clothing she had made from woven bark and animal hide, fitted close to her body for mobility rather than aesthetics. Her eyes were the thing that held him. They were gray-green and absolutely steady, and they looked at him with an assessment so thorough he felt like an equation being solved. She was not evaluating his appearance or his rank or his potential as a mate. She was evaluating his threat level, his competence, his likelihood of survival without her continued intervention. She was looking at him the way a general looks at a new recruit who has shown up to a conflict zone in dress shoes. His wolf lost its composure entirely. Not aggressively, not with the force of an animal encountering a threat. His wolf came forward with a surge that pushed Cole's consciousness to the back of his own skull, and for 3 full seconds he was a passenger in his own body while his wolf processed the reality of Lena Harper standing in morning sunlight. the absence, the void that had pulled him across an ocean and into his dreams and through the boundary waters to a death island. It was here, standing 12 feet away, a living, breathing source of nothing, and being in the presence of that nothing was like standing in the eye of a hurricane where every direction was wind except the exact spot where you were standing, and that spot was perfectly, impossibly calm. His eyes went gold. He could not stop them. "You can put those away," Lena said, looking at his eyes with the calm disapproval of someone who has seen scarier things than a wolf trying to introduce itself. Her voice was still rough, still gravel-textured, but it had a command structure underneath it that his wolf responded to before his brain could process the words. His eyes went back to brown. He did not choose this. His wolf obeyed her. That had never happened before. "Sit down," she said. "I need to tell you something about this island, and about me, and about why you need to be very careful about what you do with the information." He sat. She stayed standing. She did not sit, because sitting would have put them at the same level, and she was not ready for the same level. She needed the height. She needed the control. After 10 years of absolute dominion over her environment, sharing space with another person required a degree of choreography that she was inventing as she went. "I have been on this island for 10 years, she said. "I have survived every species on it, mapped every square foot of it, and built a life here that works. It is not comfortable. It is not happy. It is functional, and functional is the only standard I have applied to anything since I was 17. She paused, adjusted her footing on the volcanic rock. "You are here because your wolf detected my scent void through the boundary water currents. I know this because you told the jungle about it for 8 days before I confirmed I was alive. Your wolf is responding to something about my absence that it interprets as a bonding signal. I understand the mechanics. I grew up in a pack. I went to the same schools every wolf goes to. I know what the bond instinct is." Cole watched her from the ground. He did not interrupt. His wolf was pressed against his ribs so hard he could feel it vibrating. "Here is what I need you to understand," Lena said, and her voice dropped half a register, not for effect, but because the next words were heavy and she needed a lower gear to carry them. "The last time I was near a pack, they threw me in the ocean. The last time I trusted wolves to respond to what I am with anything other than fear, they used the word abomination, and then they used a boat. I have spent 10 years building something here, a life, a territory, a self, and I did it alone because alone was the only option anyone gave me." She looked at him directly. "I am not going to let another wolf dismantle that because his instincts told him to cross an ocean." Cole sat with those words for a long time. "I did not come here to dismantle anything," he said. "You came here because your wolf told you to." "Yes. And what does your wolf want?" Cole considered lying, considered softening it, considered the diplomatic phrasing that 6 years of council politics had trained into him like a reflex. Instead, he told her the truth. "My wolf wants to never leave this spot." Lena's jaw tightened. Her wolf, the enormous quiet thing that had anchored her to this island for a decade, pressed against her ribs in response to his wolf's declaration, and the pressure was not defensive. It was not a warning. It was the same leaning she had felt on night 7, that compass needle adjustment, and feeling it again in daylight, with his eyes on her face and his words still hanging in the air between them, was worse than feeling it in the dark, because in the dark she could pretend it was not happening. In daylight, there was nowhere to hide. She turned away, looked at the jungle, counted the tree trunks she could see from this angle. 11, 12, 13. "Then your wolf is going to have to learn patience," she said, "because trust is not something I keep in stock." Cole nodded. This was fair. This was, in fact, the most reasonable thing anyone had said to him in 6 years. He was patient, because patience was what she required, and his wolf, for the first time in his memory, agreed with a strategy that was not immediate action. His wolf understood what Cole's political brain was still processing, that this woman had survived something his wolf recognized at a cellular level, and the recognition was not conquest or claim or the territorial impulse that drove most alpha bonding behavior. It was alignment. The sense of two frequencies that had been oscillating independently for decades and were now, slowly, beginning to synchronize. They did not synchronize quickly. Lena did not permit quick. She showed him the island instead. Methodically, systematically, the way a professor conducts a field study. She walked him through the Eastern Ridge cat territories and taught him to read the claw marks by height and freshness. She showed him the water sources and explained the mineral cycle, and watched him drink from the clean supply with the critical eye of someone grading an exam. She taught him the high meadow, the grain planting schedule, the bird defense system she had devised using reflected light from polished volcanic glass. She showed him the canopy spider highways and the viper nesting patterns and the volcanic venting schedule that required evacuation to high ground every 11 months. She taught him her island, and in teaching it she was telling him who she had become. He listened the way he listened to everything, completely, without interruption, filing each piece of information in a mental architecture that Lena was beginning to recognize as genuinely formidable. Cole Weston was not merely strong, he was intelligent in a way that did not advertise itself, that sat quietly behind the physical presence and the royal authority and operated with the efficiency of a machine that had been well maintained. 3 weeks in, she let him see her shift. It was not intentional. A ridge cat appeared on the camp perimeter at dusk, a young male testing territorial boundaries the way young males do, and Lena's response was automatic. She shifted in the space between one breath and the next, human to wolf, in a transition so fast and so fluid that Cole's eyes could not track the change. One moment she was a woman, standing by a fire. The next, she was a wolf. Gray-white, lean, silent, moving toward the ridge cat with a purpose that had no aggression in it and no fear. The ridge cat evaluated her for 2 seconds and left. Lena shifted back. Cole was staring at her with an expression she could not read. "Your wolf," he said, and stopped. "What about it?" "It is the quietest wolf I have ever encountered. Quiet is not the same as weak." "I did not say weak, I said quiet. There is a difference, and it is an important one." Lena looked at him. His eyes were brown. His wolf was pressed against his ribs but was not pushing forward. He was controlling it, she realized, holding it back, giving her space not because he wanted space but because she needed it, and he was choosing her need over his wolf's demand. That act of restraint landed harder than any declaration could have. She sat down by the fire, across from him, still, a distance, but at the same level. It was enough. For now, it was enough. The conversation changed after that night. The territory mapping continued, but the silences between them shifted in character, grew warmer, less defensive. Lena found herself talking not just about the island, but about the things she had thought during her years on it. The philosophical questions that arise when you spend a decade alone with your own mind. What identity meant when there was no one to reflect it back to you. What strength meant when there was no audience to perform it for. What survival meant when you had succeeded at it so completely that you had to start asking what came next. Cole listened. He responded with his own questions, his own uncertainties, the private doubts that an alpha king carries in the space between the crown and the skull. Whether power was worth the performance it required, whether governance could be honest without being weak, whether a kingdom built on bloodline hierarchy could survive the discovery that bloodline was a less reliable foundation than its defenders insisted. They were not falling in love. That phrase implies descent, and what was happening between them was not a fall. It was a construction, deliberate, careful, weight-tested at every joint. Two people who had survived different kinds of isolation, building a bridge between their positions, plank by plank, checking each one before putting weight on it. It took time. Lena demanded time. Cole granted it. And under everything, beneath the conversations and the territory walks and the slow, careful architecture of trust, their wolves were doing something neither of them discussed. They were synchronizing, not bonding, not yet, but aligning, the way two instruments tune to the same pitch before the music begins. Cole could feel it in the way his sleep changed. The absence dreams stopped. The restless pacing of his wolf stopped. In their place was a stillness that felt less like peace and more like preparation. The calm before a frequency locks in and everything changes. Lena felt it too. Her wolf, the quiet anchor that had held her to this island for a decade, was not quiet anymore. It was humming, low, constant, at a frequency she could feel in her teeth when she was close to Cole and in her chest when she was far away. The hum was not uncomfortable. It was not invasive. It was the sound of something waking up that had been sleeping for a very long time, and the waking was so gradual that she could almost pretend it was not happening. Almost. On day 30, she told him about the banishment. Not the single sentence she had given him on night 12, the full account, the healers and their 9 tests, the whisper campaign that turned her from an oddity into a threat, her mother's eyes sliding away across the dinner table, the elder council's formal decree, the boat, the 6 wolves who held her, the water. She told it in the same flat, factual tone she had used the first time, because the story lived in her body in a place that did not have access to emotional inflection. It was data, event, cause, consequence. She had processed it into information years ago, and information did not shake in the telling. But halfway through she stopped. She was describing the moment the longboat reached the boundary waters, the moment the air changed and the current went dark, and she stopped because her hands were gripping her knees with enough force to whiten the knuckles, and she realized that the story did not live in the flat, factual place she thought she had filed it. It lived somewhere deeper, somewhere with nerve endings, and telling it to another person had reconnected the circuit. She did not finish the story. She stood up. She walked into the jungle. Cole did not follow her. He sat by the fire and let her go, because following would have been for him and staying was for her, and he had learned the difference. She came back at dawn, sat across from him, did not reference the night before. He did not reference it either. They continued. And somewhere between day 30 and day 40, in a moment that neither of them could afterward identify or pin to a specific conversation or a specific look or a specific word, the hum in Lena's chest and the stillness in Cole's ribs synchronized. The bond fired. It was not dramatic. It was not a lightning strike or a cosmic event or any of the theatrical metaphors that the old stories used to describe the moment. It was a click, the precise mechanical sound of 2 things that were built to connect, finally connecting. A key in a lock. A frequency reaching resonance. Lena felt it happen and stopped walking mid-step on the high meadow trail. Cole felt it happen and put his hand flat on the nearest rock and breathed through the sensation of his entire internal architecture reorganizing itself around a new center of gravity. They looked at each other across 12 feet of volcanic rock, and the distance between them, which Lena had calibrated and defended and insisted upon for 40 days, was the wrong distance, not too far, not too close. Wrong in a way that had nothing to do with measurement, and everything to do with the fact that the bond had rewritten the physics. Lena's wolf made a sound she had never heard it make. Not a howl, not a growl, a low, sustained note, like a bell being struck so deep the sound was more vibration than noise. Cole's wolf answered. They stood in the high meadow with the grain growing around them, and the jungle holding its breath, and their wolves resonating at a frequency that hummed in the volcanic rock beneath their feet. And for the first time in 10 years, Lena Harper did not feel alone. She also did not feel safe, because the bond changed everything, and everything included the carefully constructed fortress of solitary competence that had kept her alive and sane for a decade. The bond was a door opening, and she did not trust open doors. But she did not close it. She reached across the 12 feet of volcanic rock and put her hand on top of his, and the contact was the first time she had voluntarily touched another person since 6 wolves held her down in a longboat and tipped her future into the sea. She did not count bark ridges. She did not look away. She held on. The morning they sailed from the island, the ocean was flat and still and silver all the way to the horizon. Lena stood at the front of the repaired boat and looked east toward the mainland, and she did not look back at the island behind her. Not because she did not care. She carried 10 years of that island in the architecture of her body, in the muscles that could climb volcanic rock in darkness, in the hands that knew the weight of a sharpened bone, in the eyes that could read a ridge cat's claw marks by height and age and mood. The island had made her. It had broken the girl who arrived and built a woman from the wreckage, and that woman owed the place something she could not name and would not cheapen by calling it gratitude. But she was not sentimental. Sentiment was a luxury she had traded for survival a long time ago, and even now, with Cole's presence at her back, and the bond humming between them like a wire under tension, she did not have the habit of it. She looked forward, because forward was where the next problem was, and Lena Harper had trained herself to face problems head first. The next problem was a kingdom. Cole had told her about it in pieces over the 40 days on the island. The territories, the alliances, the council structure, the elder system that governed wolf society through a network of bloodline hierarchies so ancient and so entrenched that challenging them was roughly equivalent to challenging gravity. You could argue with it philosophically, but at the end of the argument you were still stuck to the ground. He had also told her about the politics of his bonding. An Alpha King's mate was not simply a partner, she was a political entity, a structural element in the kingdom's power architecture. Her bloodline would be scrutinized. Her pack history would be investigated. Her scent signature would be analyzed and cataloged and compared against every alliance database in every territory to determine which families she connected and which she threatened. Lena had no bloodline worth scrutinizing. Her pack had erased her from their records the day they dropped her in the sea. She had no family connections, no alliance value, no political leverage. She was a banished wolf from a mid-rank pack who had been living on a death island for a decade and showed up at court smelling like nothing and wearing clothes made from bark. The Elder Council was going to have objections. "I know," Cole said when she raised this. He said it with the calm of someone who has already considered the problem, built a strategy around it, and is now simply waiting for the right moment to deploy. Lena looked at him. "What is your plan?" "Walk in the front door." "That is not a plan. That is a direction of travel. It is the only direction that matters. Everything else is sequence." Lena wanted to argue with this, but she could not find the flaw in it. Stealth was not an option. Diplomacy required standing. The only asset they held was the bond itself, which was undeniable to any wolf who got close enough to feel its resonance, and the only way to deploy that asset was to walk into the seat of power and let it speak for itself. They landed on the mainland at a port town called Harrow's Gate, which was small enough to lack a council presence and large enough to have a communications relay. Cole sent a message to Drew through the relay and received a response within 2 hours that consisted of 4 words. "Where have you been?" No question mark. Lena noted this and filed it alongside everything else she was learning about Cole's second, who apparently expressed concern through punctuation choices. They traveled east toward the capital. It took 3 days on foot because Cole's boat was not seaworthy for coastal travel, and Lena refused to accept transport from the local wolves who offered it. She did not say why. Cole did not ask. But the reason was simple, and she would have told him if he had asked. She was not going to enter the capital in someone else's vehicle, dependent on someone else's generosity, positioned as a passenger in her own arrival. She had walked across every inch of a death island. She could walk across a kingdom. The landscape changed as they moved east. Wilder territory gave way to managed forests, and managed forests gave way to agricultural land, and agricultural land gave way to the outer settlements of the capital, and the outer settlements gave way to the capital itself. It was enormous. Lena had grown up in a mid-rank pack settlement of maybe 2,000 wolves, and the capital held 50 times that number. The buildings were stone and timber, scaled for wolf sensibility, with wide corridors and open sightlines and the kind of architectural confidence that comes from a civilization that has been building on the same spot for centuries. Wolves noticed them as they walked. Of course they did. The Alpha King had been missing for 6 weeks, and now he was walking through the capital's main avenue with a woman no one recognized, wearing traveling clothes and covered in road dust, and between them, the bond was resonating at a frequency that any wolf within 30 feet could feel like a tuning fork pressed against their sternum. By the time they reached the palace, they had an audience. Drew met them at the gate. He was everything Cole had described, broad and solid, and radiating a loyalty so pronounced it was practically visible, like a golden retriever who had been trained in military tactics. He looked at Cole, he looked at Lena, he looked at the space between them where the bond hummed. Then he looked at Cole again. "You went hunting," Drew said. "I did. On the Forbidden Island." "Yes." Drew processed this. His face did something complicated that involved 3 different emotions arriving simultaneously and negotiating for control of his expression. "I am going to need a much longer version of this story," he said. "Later. And the tally on my wall? You can take it down." Drew looked at Lena one more time. She looked back at him with the steady, assessing gaze that Cole had learned not to flinch under, and Drew, to his credit, did not flinch either. "Welcome," he said, and meant it. The Elder Council did not say welcome. The council chamber was a circular room at the heart of the palace, built from stone so old it had developed its own weather patterns, cold in summer and warm in winter, and perpetually smelling of the accumulated authority of every decision that had been made inside it. 7 chairs arranged in a semicircle, each occupied by an elder whose age and rank were displayed in the gray of their hair and the formality of their clothing, and the practiced neutrality of their expressions. Cole walked in first. Lena walked in behind him. Not beside him, behind. This was deliberate. She had told him on the road that she would not enter the council chamber at his side, because standing beside the king implied equal status, and she was not going to claim equal status before she had earned it. She was going to claim something different, something the council was not expecting. The head elder, a wolf named Hugh Prescott, who had held his seat for 30 years and wore his authority the way some men wear expensive coats, spoke first. "The king has been absent for 6 weeks. The council requires an explanation." Cole provided one, briefly. The sent dreams, the trade ship reports, the journey to the island, the discovery. He laid out the facts the way Lena had taught him to lay out territory maps. Clean lines, clear landmarks, nothing decorative. "And the woman?" Hugh Prescott asked, looking at Lena the way someone looks at an item on an agenda. "Her name is Lena Harper. She is my bonded mate." The room changed temperature. 7 elders shifted in their chairs, and the shift was not physical comfort. It was political discomfort, the involuntary readjustment of people who have just been given information that threatens their infrastructure. "There has been no ceremony," Hugh Prescott said, "no council approval, no bloodline verification." "The bond does not require council approval," Cole said. "It never has. The ceremony is a formality. The bloodline verification is a tradition. The bond is biology." "The bond requires compatibility assessment." "The bond is the compatibility assessment. It has already fired. You can feel it from where you are sitting." This was true, and Hugh Prescott knew it was true, and the knowing was visible in the tightening of his jaw. Every wolf in the room could feel the resonance between Cole and Lena. It was not subtle. It was not ambiguous. It was a frequency that pressed against the walls and floor and ceiling of the council chamber, and made the old stone hum. "She has no scent," one of the other elders said. A woman named Diane Ashworth, who sat at the far left of the semicircle and had a reputation for directness that bordered on tactlessness. The instruments read nothing. "The instruments are wrong," Lena said. It was the first time she had spoken. 7 elder heads turned toward her. The attention was heavy, weighted with authority and suspicion, and Lena met it with the eyes of a woman who had stared down ridge cats and volcanic venting and 10 years of solitary darkness on an island that had tried to end her every single day. "Explain," Hugh Prescott said. Lena did not explain. Not yet. She did something else first. She stepped forward, past Cole, past the space where a petitioner would traditionally stand, and walked to the center of the semicircle, where the floor was marked with a circle of inlaid stone that represented the kingdom's territory. She stood on the map. "I am not scentless," she said. "I have never been scentless. The instruments read nothing because they were not built to measure what I carry. My scent does not operate on a single frequency. It operates on all of them. Every frequency your instruments are calibrated to detect, I produce simultaneously. The signals stack, they compress, and the result reads as nothing because your instruments interpret the presence of everything as the absence of anything. In the old texts, the ones your predecessors locked behind glass because they contradicted the bloodline hierarchy you built your power on, this condition has a name: the root scent, the original frequency that existed before wolf packs, divided into territories and bloodlines, became political borders." Hugh Prescott's face went still, not surprised, controlled, the face of a man who has just heard something he hoped would never be said aloud in a room where it mattered. "A wolf who carries the root scent does not belong to a pack," Lena said. She held Hugh Prescott's gaze. "Every pack belongs to her." The silence that followed was not the comfortable silence of a room processing information. It was the taut, pressurized silence of a room in which the foundations of a 300-year-old power structure had just been publicly identified as optional. Hugh Prescott spoke first, because the head elder always speaks first, and because speaking first is how you control a narrative that is trying to control you. The root scent is a myth, a historical curiosity from texts that predate modern wolf science. No living wolf has been verified as carrying it in over 500 years. No living wolf has been tested for it in over 500 years, Lena said. Your instruments test for individual frequencies. Mine stack. You have been reading compression artifacts as absence. Every healer who tested me, every tracker who scanned me, every elder who called me an abomination, was making the same error. They read the silence and assumed it meant nothing was there. It meant everything was there. This is a remarkable claim from a wolf, with no pack standing, no documentation, and no verifiable history. My history is verifiable. I was banished from the Grey Ridge Pack at age 17 by elder decree. The decree is on file with your own records office, because banishment orders are copied to the capital as a matter of administrative procedure. The charge was scentlessness. The sentence was the Forbidden Island. I survived there for 10 years. Your king found me. His wolf bonded with mine. I am standing in your council chamber. These are facts. She turned to address the full semicircle. I did not come here to argue about what I am. I came here because the man whose wolf crossed an ocean to find mine is your king, and your king has been searching for a bondmate for 6 years, while 43 candidates failed to activate an instinct that fired the moment he detected my frequency. Your kingdom needs a bonded alpha pair. Here I am. She let that sit. But I also did not come here to be polite. She reached across the treaty table and picked up a pen, turned it in her fingers, felt its weight. I want a list, she said. Every pack that has banished a member in the last 50 years. Every elder who signed the orders. Every wolf who was thrown into the water or left on an island or driven into the wilderness because their scent or their wolf or their existence did not fit the categories your hierarchy requires. You have no authority to demand council records. I have the bond, your king's bond. The bond that your own laws recognize as the highest biological authority in wolf governance. And I have 10 years on an island that your council uses as a disposal method for wolves who inconvenience you. She set the pen down. I did not survive that island to come back and be polite. The room held its breath. 7 elders in 7 chairs, each one recalculating the political landscape in real time, each one arriving at the same uncomfortable conclusion through a different path. Hugh Prescott looked at Cole. Cole looked back. His eyes were brown. His wolf was still. The stillness was not passivity. It was the quiet of a king who has found the thing he was looking for and is no longer interested in performing uncertainty. "The records will be made available," Cole said. "The investigation will proceed. The council can participate or observe. Those are the options." Hugh Prescott's jaw worked. 30 years of institutional authority pressed against the reality of a bonded alpha pair whose resonance was making the council chamber's stone walls vibrate at a frequency the building had not felt in 3 centuries. "We will need time to review the legal framework," he said. "You will have until morning," Cole said. "After that, the review becomes administrative, not optional." The meeting ended. The elders filed out in a silence that had the specific quality of people whose arguments have been preemptively dismantled and who need privacy to construct new ones. Lena stood on the inlaid map in the center of the chamber floor and watched them go. Her hands were steady. Her wolf was steady. The bond hummed between her and Cole with a resonance that filled the room like warmth. Drew appeared in the doorway after the last elder left. He looked at the empty chairs. He looked at Lena standing on the map. He looked at Cole. "So that went well," Drew said. Lena almost laughed. The almost was a start. That night, Lena stood at the window of the quarters Cole had given her and looked out over the capital. The city stretched below in a grid of light and shadow, 50,000 wolves going about their lives inside a system that had organized itself around bloodline and hierarchy and the comfortable assumption that the categories it used to sort the world were natural rather than constructed. Tomorrow the records would arrive. Names and dates and pack designations, a bureaucratic accounting of every wolf who had been deemed unfit, inadequate, or threatening by the elder system and disposed of through the mechanisms the system had built for disposal. Banishment decrees. Exile orders. The administrative paperwork of institutional cruelty, filed and cataloged and stored in the same records office that processed trade agreements and census data. Lena did not know how many names the list would contain. She did not know how many of them would still be alive. She did not know how many had found their own islands, their own decades of silence, their own private negotiations with survival. She knew one thing. She had been one of them. She had been a name on a decree, a problem solved by geography, a girl in a boat heading toward a place teeth do not reach. And she had come back. Not the same, not healed, not whole in the way that stories want their survivors to be whole, polished and resolved and narratively complete. She was cracked in places that would never fully seal. She was rough in places that would never fully smooth. She carried 10 years of volcanic rock and silence inside her like ballast, and that weight was not something she wanted to set down. It was what kept her upright. It was what kept her steady in a room full of elders who wanted her to be smaller and quieter and more manageable than she was. She picked up the pen she had taken from the treaty table. She had not meant to take it. Her hand had closed around it during the walk out of the chamber. An unconscious acquisition. The scavenger instinct of a woman who had spent a decade on an island where every object had value and nothing was left behind. She turned it in her fingers. A council pen. Heavy, silver-capped, embossed with the elder seal. She put it in her pocket. In the morning, she would use it.